studio, when I'm normally shooting, I use natural light, and I have an incredible amount of it. And everybody that comes in here says how amazing my light is, but it can often be too much for what it is that I'm shooting. So I need to be able to control it and direct it into the subject to get that beautiful composition that I'm looking for. What I've done here is just set our little fake baby up so I can show you how I do that. Currently I have 2 floor-to-ceiling windows off here to my right, and they are diffused by a filter on the glass. So that light is going to be beautiful and soft. But as you can see on the baby, let's bring her into frame. Her face, even though she's on a 45-degree angle towards that light source, is really quite bright. I could turn her slightly away from the window to create more shadow, but then what would happen is the left-hand side of her over here would become even darker, and I still need some light to fall off over her as I'm taking my shot. So what I need to do is block some of the light that's coming through onto her face to create some more shadows and just soften it down a little bit so that the light is not so intense. Sometimes when we have too much light, we can blow out a lot of the features. I want to block some of the light to bring in some shadows to really, create a 3-dimensional look around all of her little face, those little details, and just make it absolutely perfect. So I'm going to show you how I do that. So before we do that, we'll take a before shot. And if you just bring up that blanket there for me, Tiffany, just lift it a little higher for me, give it a pull, that's it. So I'm looking at the shadows on the blanket there. And again, trying to get her little face square up to the lens, a full stop overexposed. All right, so you can see there, we've got some beautiful, beautiful composition. We've got lots of light coming through, but I do want to block some of that light off so it's not so intense and create some more shadows. So what I'm going to do is use a large V-flat, and I'm going to bring it in on my window and place it up against the bottom half of the window, blocking that. And that way the light's going to come through the top half of the window. It's not going to hit the floor and bounce up, which currently is what it's doing. And that's why there's so much light going on around the face, because as it comes in, it bounces up off the floor and back into my subject. So instead of it doing that, I basically just want it to come straight down and into the baby's face. So we're going to get more control and definition in terms of that light and shadow. All right, so as you can see, all of that light coming through the window there. And from this angle, it's a little better to understand how it actually does come in, hit the floor and bounce up, because all surfaces are reflective. So I want to be able to direct that light even more by stopping that bounce onto the floor. I'm going to bring this in, and it is quite high. I don't necessarily want it to be that high. So what I'm going to do is just bring it out a little bit and lean it into the window there. So now as I'm looking at the doll, I can actually see that light coming through, and the floors become much darker. This is going to give me more control over that light, bringing down some of those highlights, but I've still got detail in those shadows, which is great. Also over here, when I said I've got too much light, I often use these V-flats to just block out the light coming through behind the doll onto the posing bag there. So you can see the back of the blanket is actually quite dark. If I was to bring this back this way and open that up, the light that's going to change on the posing bag there in terms of that blanket, I'm now adding light to the back, which is going to make it too bright in terms of how I expose for the baby's skin, and then she'll just blend into the background. So to be able to light her and not light the background means that she's going to be brighter and stand out, and it's going to create that separation between her and the background. And you'll notice this a lot when you're shooting with these sort of more neutral tones that are similar to a baby's skin. So that's why I close that and then only use this area of the light to come through and light her. And it gives me a lot better control. Okay, so let's get a shot of this and have a look at the difference that just reducing some of that light makes. Because it's not only the direction of it, but sometimes the intensity that makes the difference that we're looking for in our photographs. So now you can see I shot the last frame at a full stop overexposed. Now I can actually bring my exposure up and go a full stop overexposed. Okay, so press play. If we have a look before, we've got some really strong highlights there on her face. And now if we go to the next frame, you can see just how much softer those skin tones are, but we've still got lots of detail in those shadows. So what I want to do now is have a look at that histogram, and that way we can see how far we can actually bring up that exposure. So here we've got a fair amount of room, but it is really quite flat. There's not a lot of shadow sort of, defining those features. But if we go to the next exposure, it's really only the highlights. As I click back and forth through those histograms, it's really only the highlights that are pulling back. So that means I can actually bring my exposure up a little bit and still have those beautiful shadows, which is what I want. Okay. Come up again, another third of a stop, and that to me looks pretty good. You can see I'm still placing the baby in the bottom 2/3 of my frame, focusing on that eye that's closest, and the baby's head is placed on those intersecting lines there, and the head is slightly higher than the body. There we go. And that to me looks like a much better histogram. And we've still got those beautiful shadows. So now if we get rid of, we can see, actually let's go before and going up a third of a stop, the difference that makes. But if we go full screen, we can go back to that original exposure and see how bright it is. And then you can see also the background, there's quite a few kind of shadows in around the blanket there. Yeah, so what we can see here is the result of that light before we blocked it, when it was coming in and hitting the floor, it's coming up and hitting the beanbag right here in front of the baby. So therefore, as the light hits here and it spreads across, it's creating some shadows right here. But if we have a look at the next exposure, now those shadows aren't as dominant because the light's only coming in from above and it's coming down and traveling across, as opposed to coming down, hitting the floor and bouncing up and going in a different direction. Because as we think about how light travels, I like to think of it as a ping pong ball. So if you were to bounce a ping pong ball on the wall, on the floor, it's going to go up at that opposing angle and hit the wall and bounce all the way around. So when we think about how it comes in and bounces up and hits there, those shadows are going to be more dominant. And that's why when we direct it and we have more control over it, we're creating a much better exposure and placing light where we want it to be with the right shadows. So yeah, that's what I'm looking for in terms of natural light. Hi, I'm Kelly Brown and welcome to Getting It Right in Camera. This course is going to show you all of the technical aspects to getting that perfect exposure. We all want to create beautiful photographs, so we need the tools to know how to do that. This course, I'm going to teach you lighting, white balance, composition, exposure. I'm going to show you how I use my histogram, and we're going to talk all about camera angle angles, focal length, and getting your photos nice and sharp. I was just like you. I used to think I'll fix it later. So now what I've done is streamline everything I do. I now work smarter, not harder, and I spend less time doing the things I don't enjoy and fixing problems, and more time in the studio shooting and doing what it is I love.